again, Mark's work on the wall with Mr. Goodman.
And I'm talking to Mark Kahn and JPF Goodman about their collaboration on JPF's poems and Mark's paintings on those. So how did you first come together on this project?
Well, through the artistic milieu of Southampton, I met Mark and Jeff Van Chuff and some other artists. Mark and Jeff are the core of a group known as the Poetic Mentalists, which arose, I like to think, from their work based on my poems, which came into an exhibition called Poetic Imagery and a subsequent book.
And the word poetic mentalists actually comes from when John, another poet and painter, a friend of ours, we tried to look at poetry and painting, and we came up with the word poetic. It symbolises poetry and art and paintings. And the mentalist side of things comes from my own title I've given my style of painting, or movement if you want, which is primitive surreal mentalism. So that's how it came about, and we're a close unit of friends. We socialise a lot, and we try to, any art event happening that we've heard about or got contacts with, we try to get involved. Because for me, and I think it's the same with John, you know, the chance of showing my work anywhere I can, you know, when I hear about a chance, I'm there, you know, and I just want to get my work out and viewed instead of under a bed or an electrical cupboard at home. And I'm constantly working, so any chance of promoting myself and my friends as a group or individually is what I like to do, you know.
So we can see here Mark's pictures for my poem, The Self-Medicating Greens, and Jeff's picture for a poem called Her Hand While I Slept. The concept of this was simply a collaboration between poetry and art, very similar to what Steve has turned into this great show that we've enjoyed at the Bournemouth Library for some time.
And how did this poetry come about?
Well, where does a poem come from? It sort of enters into you from various things, maybe a line, a concept, something like that. Certainly I wrote the poems, and my friends, my artistic friends, managed to transfer it into their own special imagery.
And Mark, what first attracted you to JPF's poetry?
Well, basically I think the original idea came from just a one-to-one between me and John some time ago the book happened, because I've done illustration mainly through a song from bands I like, and I mentioned to John about his poetry, whether, you know, would you be up for me doing some illustrations, but it never really took off. And he gave me a book some time ago with loads of poems. Do you remember that, John?
Oh yes.
He gave me a booklet of all his poems, but I never got around to doing it because I had other things to do. But when it come up to his birthday, we mentioned it, and basically me and Jeff and John got together and some other artists and talked about it. So we loved to do it, and we had an exhibition at a Goblets Gallery in Southampton relating to your birthday, wasn't it?
That's right.
And that's how it originally came about. But according for me, the imagery coming out of his poems are basically what I did. I read the poem, and I just looked at different paragraphs of the poem. I could see the poem had two sections to it. So I just read each paragraph, took a certain amount of information, and done about 5 to 6 drawings in a storyboard process relating to certain paragraphs of the information in the poems. And it took me about 2 weeks to do, and then I deciphered it and rearranged it a bit, and just came up with the imagery on the paintings relating to the original drawings I did. But the thing is, when I work, I sort of go on a journey from starting point to an ending point, but that's not really the important issue. The important issue for me when I work, mainly in illustration, is what happens between the starting and the finishing, because that is the bulk and the essence of the work. I think I'm quite lucky with illustration because I'm very influenced by surrealism, and I visualise a lot quite easily, so I'm quite lucky that I can generate ideas quite quickly and quite sort of stern visualisations earlier on. The wilder, the more eccentric work for me I love, you know. The weirder and wilder and rawer and primitive, that's me. So I really enjoyed working with the poems, and there's a bit of sense of humour in the poems, and which I enjoy as well, and that adds to the characters in my paintings.
I told these guys to just be free, extemporise on the work as they wished, and so of course I had no idea what images they would produce. And while Mark's, as he said, he's used a sort of storyboard format, other artists have used sort of single imagery. So Jeff did this picture. You might see this small figure down here that's supposed to represent the poet. So I was quite surprised by that, I must say. Kate Thelwell is another artist who is involved in that, and Sandy O'Donnell, that's their work. They produce sort of individual images, but hopefully distilled the elements of a poem that they could see.
And what is your favourite image from the responses you've had?
Oh, well, that is a very tough question, isn't it? It's an awkward question. They're all good. I mean, Mark's work, obviously, there's a fund of imagery there, and his work repays re-looking at many times. Jeff, of course, has done a very neat trick of summing up the essence of that particular poem. So I would have to put those among my favourite, but they all have their special merits. And something else I'd like to say is that the show we managed to produce in Southampton, in a rather amateurish way, it had this idea of a collaboration between poetry and art, but Steve has actually produced a real show, an event.
So, how did all of this work, your work, come together with Steve's work?
Well, I first met Steve Biddle at the Freeway Poetry events at the Winchester Pub here in Bournemouth, and we found that we were thinking along similar lines in terms of combining poetry and art, and Steve very kindly invited me to bring some of the work along to be included in this exhibition.
So what do you think of the art scene in Bournemouth? What have we got and what do we need?
Yeah, interesting. I'm not too sure the art scene in Bournemouth because I don't come here regularly, but of course it's the same as Southampton, like, because I'm also a drummer and I teach drums as well. But the thing is, I find with places like Southampton, I'm not too sure about Bournemouth, is that for a long time, like Brighton is quite culturally rich and aware. Southampton is nowhere near as strong as Brighton for that culture, but there's always been interest in and talented people working either in music, film, fashion, art, or whatever. But the thing is, like your question asked, there's not the platform for people to take off or show their works.
Yes.
You know, there's not a starting point for them. So I think being on the south coast, Bournemouth, Brighton, and Southampton are big cities. You know, and we're not far from London, so why doesn't the scene flourish? You know, why don't there more events, more people opening establishments, either pubs or venues, for people who can get out there and show that there's a lot of interest in underground talent. You know, just being creative and working, and they need to produce and show the work, get the promotion, you know, and the exposure.
Yes, I think obviously the problem is bringing an audience to the work, and people like Steve with his entrepreneurial spirit can create events like this, so it creates an interest and a ripple of its own. So that's the essential element, which in some ways I think Bournemouth has more of a sense of occasion for these things. Southampton is developing a little bit. We're talking about a cultural quarter developing there, although that is a little bit artificial, but hopefully it will evolve into something so that people accept that it's a place to go for these events, whereas in Bournemouth there's a certain amount of energy already established.
What I like about the exhibition is diverse. It doesn't, you know, relate to just painting or just poetry or photography. There's a diversity, and you can see each artist's identity or their interests in their work, and I think that's being well achieved and celebrated. I think.
What do you think we should have next? Where should we go from here?
Well, the library, I believe this is the first exhibition the library has actually had here in their new exhibition room, so hopefully they'll continue to have events which support local talent and more events like that. And for our own individual cases, while we can be aware of the sort of community of creatives around us, we just have to carry on ploughing our own furrow and trying to create good work which hopefully we can bring to share in whatever venues make themselves available.
I think for me as an artist and the people I've met through this exhibition and other, is just to keep working, keep pushing yourself, working, also finding a balance between working and promotion and exposure. If you can get those to a certain level, I think that would help everyone individually and as a group of artists, poets.
Thank you very
Goodbye.
much, both. Thank you.